All right, so second semester, final review. Pay close attention, please. Number 1, simplify the expression. So, first of all, let me tell you, don't write this part down. This is not x squared minus 64. Can anybody tell me why that is not x squared minus 64? Okay. So what's in the parentheses is what is being squared, and to square something means to do what? Multiply it by itself. So if we're multiplying x minus 8 by itself, then we have to multiply x minus 8 times x minus 8. Then we have to completely distribute. So you can use two different methods for multiplying this out. One is the FOIL method. That's the main one that we've been using. So that is x times x squared, x times negative 8, negative 8x. Write this down. Negative 8 times x, also negative 8x. And negative 8 times negative 8, which is? Positive 64. And then we combine like terms. 8 times 8, negative 8 times negative 8. So, combine our like terms, negative 8x and negative 8x gives us negative 16x. And we drop everything that we didn't use down. So, x squared and the plus 64. Keep in mind, if you don't start with an equal sign in a problem, you're not going to end with an equal sign. We're not solving anything here, we're just simplifying. So this is our answer right here. The other method of doing this, which is the same thing mathematically, just gives you a visual representation, is to multiply using the boxes. So you put x minus 8 times x minus 8, and then you multiply x times x times negative 8, x times negative 8, and negative 8 times negative 8, which is positive 64. And then you combine your like terms, and you end up with the same result, x squared minus 16x plus 64. So it's extremely common for people to see this x minus 8 squared and just square x and square negative 8. You can't do that. You can't distribute that exponent into the parentheses if you're adding or subtracting in the parentheses. So make sure you're not making that mistake. Down to number 2. This is where a lot of people struggled. This is one of the standards a lot of people need to fix are those negative exponents and exponent laws in general. So a negative exponent, anytime we see a negative exponent, that tells us it's in the wrong place. Yeah, to simplify an exponential, we have to get rid of any negative exponents. So do you guys remember how to do that? You move it, so you make it a fraction, and you move it to the top or the bottom of the fraction, depending on where it starts. So if I make this a fraction over 1, then I take this entire thing, and I move it down. So I'm going to erase that 1 now. Make that negative 8x, and then what happens to that exponent? It becomes a positive. So instead of negative 2, it becomes a positive 2. So I'm going to rewrite what I have now. 64 x to the third over parentheses negative 8x to the second. So the negative exponent, whatever is being put to a negative exponent, needs to be moved from the top of the fraction to the bottom, or if it's on the bottom and it's a negative exponent, then you move it to the top and you get rid of the negative. But the exponent itself, the actual number, stays there. Mercedes is not here. TJ? So, the next thing we need to do, what can we do to simplify from here? Huh? Numbers. What can we do with numbers to simplify? Can we do anything to the top? Not at this point. There's nothing to simplify at this point, so we're going to bring that down. What about the bottom? How can we get rid of those parentheses? Well, we got rid of the negative exponent, and let's talk about, off to the side, what negative 8x to the second power means. So what's being squared in this case? So negative 8x times negative 8x, right? So negative 8 times negative 8 is? And x times x. So I'm going to take that and put it down here. What can I do now? Divide what? It would just come out as x, right? Because I've got, if I have x to the third on the top and x squared on the bottom, and I divide those out to 1, all I'm left with is that single x. What about the 64s? It would. 64 divided by 64 would be 1x left from the x to the third over x to the second, and I can just leave that as x if I'd like to, or I can leave it as 1x. Either way is fine. Any questions on number 2? Factor to solve the quadratic equation. So, on this one, we're not using the quadratic formula because it specifically tells us to factor to solve. Now, do I have to go the entire box and diamond method if I want to factor this? I don't on this particular one. Why not? Do we have a greatest common factor? Because we only have 2 terms here, right? X. Both of these have an x that I can divide out. So if I divide out that x, what's inside the parentheses? X minus 9. Because x squared over x leaves me with that x, and 9x divided by x just leaves me with the negative 9. And that equals 0. Am I in factored form? I am. Once I'm in factored form and I have it equaling 0, what do I use? The zero product property. So what that means is that if I am multiplying 2 or more things and they equal 0, then I set each factor equal to 0. One of my factors is x, so I simply set that as x equals 0. What's my other factor? X minus 9. And what do I do to solve that one? Add 9 to both sides. X squared, or sorry, x equals 9. Yep. And those are my 2 answers. That is all there is to it. Okay. So, the next one, remember to read the instructions on these. This is factor to solve the quadratic equation. So I'm going to factor this one. I can use the algebraic grouping method on this, or I can use the box and diamond on this. I'm going to go ahead and use the box and diamond because that does seem to be what more people are comfortable with. If you're more comfortable with the algebraic grouping, then by all means, please use that. So with the box and diamond method, start with your first term in one corner. First off, make sure everything is on one side equaling 0. That's the important part of this to start with. If it's not equaling 0, this isn't going to work. So if it equals something else, you want to get everything to one side. first term and then your last term. And what do you do with those two? Multiply them. We got 6x squared on the top, and what do we put on the bottom? Negative 7x. And then we need to factor our top numbers. So we've got 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and then 3 and 2, so we're all done. Now, we have to watch out for our negatives. If our top number is positive, got it? Okay. So if our top number is positive, that means they are either both negative or both positive, because a positive and a positive multiply together to give you a positive, as well as a negative and a negative. So if the bottom number is negative, they both need to be negative. So then which pair works? So negative 1 and negative 6, because those are going to add together to give me negative 7. So we put negative 1x and negative 6x, and then we put those in the remaining boxes. Then we factor out from a column or a row. It doesn't really matter where we start. So what's our greatest common factor between negative 1x and x squared? What can we divide out of both of those? X. And what times x gives us x squared? And what times x gives us negative 6x? Negative 6. And what times x gives us negative 1x? Negative 1. Okay, so then I rewrite it. These are my factors, so I rewrite it in factored form. X minus 6 times x minus 1 equals 0. Now what? Zero product property. I'm in factored form, so I set each part. X minus 6 equals 0. X minus 1 equals 0. And then I solve each of them separately. Add 6 to both sides on this one, so x equals 6. And add 1 to both sides on this one, so x equals 1. Those are my two answers. I'm going to go ahead and end this video because it's already 12 minutes long, and then I'll continue on the back side.